Hello, I'm Tracy Poizner, and this is Limitless, a show about exploring the frontiers of your potential and the coming revolution in human evolution. This podcast stands at the intersection of cutting-edge science and your desire to really live your best life. We'll dive into the quantum realm of waves and particles and how it applies to you and me, not as theory, but as the truth of how we operate. We'll delve into the mysterious mind-body connection and the premier technology on the planet for activating higher states of consciousness in mind and body. I hope what you hear will resonate and encourage you to stop playing small with your one wild and precious life, to start expanding into the legacy you're really here to create. To dive further into these topics or to experience this technology for yourself, visit my website at tracypoizner.com. In the last episode, I had the pleasure of chatting with Nicholas Badminton, Chief Futurist at futurist.com. And one of the things we touched on was the concept of the futures cone, which I only just learned about as I was doing research for that podcast interview, and I fell in love with it the minute I saw it. I really wanted to be able to say more about this concept. I love the way it's laid out visually. I love the structure of it. And even though Nick said that this concept hasn't really panned out for him as a very useful tool in a corporate coaching setting, maybe because it's too theoretical and doesn't really have any practical meaning for goal setting on an institutional level. But I think that on an individual level, it offers an incredibly fascinating lens for looking at the various ways we envision not just the future, but our potential as individuals. And it offers an interesting way to peek at the archetypal belief patterns that show up as we're setting our personal goals. It also applies to how we achieve those goals and what's at work behind the scenes when we surprise ourselves and blow right past our goals. And as you already know, this is the place that my curiosity really comes alive. One of my favorite quotes is from the book The Creative Act by author and music producer Rick Rubin. He says, "Don't stop at greatness, venture beyond." Here at the Limitless Podcast, we are all about venturing beyond. So let's take a look now at what's required for a person to imagine something beyond greatness. And what would make you want to go there, to stretch the bounds of your potential or the bounds of your craft, or to stretch your audience in some way by doing those things, which means helping others to evolve in a way that only you can accomplish. The concept of the futures cone that I'm talking about here comes from the work of Joseph Voros, who adapted it from earlier work by Trevor Hancock, Clement Biesold, and Charles Taylor, among others. I'll put a link for the diagram itself, which is available at thevoroscope.com. I'll put that in the show notes. But meanwhile, imagine a cone lying on its side like an empty ice cream cone, where the present moment is at the small end and time moves along horizontally towards the open end, representing the open-ended, infinitely renewable nature of possibility. All the versions of the future in this cone begin with the letter P, which makes the whole thing much more fun to talk about, and they're also easier to remember. Projected, plausible, probable, preferred, possible, and my personal favorite, preposterous. The entire cone then represents all potential futures, which means everything beyond the present moment. Are you familiar with the concept of superposition from quantum mechanics? Everything is said to be held in potential, in superposition. It doesn't materialize, it isn't perceptible until we observe it or until we apply consciousness to it. It's not that things are invisible, it's that nothing is actually in one place until we look at it. This is the moment in which something either remains a moving wave or collapses into a stationary particle. By definition, we have no idea of what's being held in potential. We can guess, but potentially everything is there. And this, in a nutshell, is the new Earth. The planet itself has changed under our feet. Or, as Dorothy would say, we're not in Kansas anymore. Intellectually as well, we can't rely on the rationality of Newtonian physics to explain our day-to-day experience of ourselves anymore. It sure can't explain how you can touch a screen in your hand and initiate a call to the other side of the world with clear video and audio and no time lag, right? So back to the cone. This cone's volume includes both the possible and the impossible versions of the future, according to our perspective at the moment, right? Because everything is possible. So this is important because when we're talking about possibilities, some of them, even most of them, lie outside of what we can even conceive of, let alone wrap our heads around. So to illustrate this in the diagram, Voros has put arrows sort of extending the impossible or unimaginable area ever outwards, while being able to adapt the scale of the whole thing to fit in an image that can be useful for us to look at and contemplate. This area of impossible futures, then, is what he calls preposterous futures. Back in 2005, futurist Jim Dator of the University of Hawaii famously proposed some laws about the future, one of which reads, any really useful idea about the future should appear ridiculous. Now, why would he say that? He doesn't say any really useful idea about the future should appear unlikely or remarkable. Ridiculous is something liable to be mocked, to be laughed at, to be the subject of ridicule. And why are we moved to mock something or to call it ridiculous? We mock whatever challenges our security or shakes the bedrock of our beliefs. As living beings, we are all hardwired for survival. Growth and expansion take a back seat. We can't be in survival mode and growth mode at the same time. Even single-celled organisms like amoebas exist within this paradigm. On a collective level, anything new that comes along that doesn't prioritize group survival feels scary and ridiculous and is therefore likely to be labeled ridiculous. Our collective idea of progress is chained to things like common sense and our primal desire for certainty. But the really useful new ideas tend to be risky and they seldom make any sense. Galileo learned about that the hard way, and he had proof right in the business end of his telescope. But it challenged the way the universe was supposed to operate. So his discoveries were not merely called ridiculous, they were labeled as dangerous. Not all outlier ideas pan out, of course, but if something is going to be a true game changer, it's going to break the existing rules of the game. And that doesn't tend to sit well with people who are invested in the game the way it is. The shadow archetype at work here is the saboteur, the doubting Thomas of archetypes who wants proof, data, statistics, historical evidence. More than anything, he wants to be right. So he hedges his bets to come out on the side of the majority. And that way, he won't be alone if things don't come out his way. He does not relish being an outlier. He's a conventional thinker, and he's acutely aware of what others think of him. Preposterous is the cry of someone who wants to laugh you out of the arena, lest you show him up on the playing field. As an aside, it's estimated that about 5.5 billion humans, roughly 2 out of 3 every persons alive, own a smartphone. This miracle of technology and commerce became possible because the revolutionary idea of a mass market pocket-sized supercomputer became less and less ridiculous bit by bit. over a number of years. It didn't take that long to happen, all things considered, but the iPhone would certainly have been preposterous, even in the 1980s, let alone the 1920s. So that was the subset of potential futures considered impossible. The other subset is the possible futures. This too is a kind of judgment call, even if a more positive one. Possible is what we judge more likely to materialize than preposterous. At least we can buy into a vision of it. We're still probably basing our judgment on how things have happened in the past, even, let's say, on the previous pace of change, for example, but we could save face and avoid looking stupid to other people for believing in magic. There's some child archetype energy here because the child is the dreamer. The child has an imagination, even if she doesn't necessarily have what it takes to turn it into a reality. The plausible category is like a subset of what's possible, a slice of cone inside of the larger cone. Plausible means believable. The belief rests on already having the existing tools or resources to bring something forth, or knowing that you could access those resources in the foreseeable future. Plausible means we can speak to the how right now in the present moment, even if some of the pieces might not be in place. At least a framework exists for how to do it. Once again, this is about the degree of believability. And according to a conventional belief system, it's not about going farther than what others are likely to agree with. And this is still a shadow state because our need for approval and credibility overtakes our desire to see the truth. The truth is, we don't know what's possible. And needing to be right or to save face stops us from approaching the future with curiosity and wonder and delight, which is the powerful state where we're free to invent and create and adapt and pivot. Probable is that version of the future that gets our bet. It's what we would lay odds on if we were pushed to take sides. We're ready to stick our neck out a little farther on this one. It requires some courage, and as such, it has a little of the warrior archetype tone to it. Knowing what's probable is a tool you can use. It gives confidence. It's something that you can lean into for support. Preferable is the only category to apply a value to the future outcome. It's the vision of the future that qualifies as better than some other worse version. It speaks to desire, to what you want and what you don't want. And this is the realm of the lover archetype, the one in charge of your priorities and preferences. The lover has standards. He chooses this future over that other one. According to the principles of New Earth consciousness, the future is not a coin toss. Your unshakable belief in the preferable future is what brings it into physical reality. It requires standing up for it, actually commanding it. You have to let go of shadow beliefs around what's probable or plausible, as well as your shadow need to be right and to be seen being right. When you want to bring something specific towards you in the future, you have to release your unconscious illusions about what is and isn't possible and literally collapse your preferred future out of superposition into reality. Now we come to the projected future. The way this term is used in the future cones, it's from the systems perspective. It's about a forecast based on existing trends. But on the psycho-spiritual level, it has a totally different meaning. In this sense, the projected future is literally a frequency you broadcast out, the way you project a film onto the screen. It's that frequency that collapses from superposition whatever is precisely coherent with it. That's what it means to master your energy. You have the power to close the gap between wanting something and receiving it. Your dominant frequency will pulse exactly like it would if you actually already had the object of your desire. The law of attraction people call this behave as if, but I don't think that quite captures it. You can't just fake it till you make it, as Chindia Ilanka says in her book Quantum Rebel. There's no wiggle room when it comes to embodying a belief. You're either all in or you're not. And the only proof is whether your preferred future actually falls at your feet. There's a great example of this from the entertainment world. Movie actor Jim Carrey talks about how, when he was an unemployed actor in his early 20s, he wrote himself a check for $10 million that he marked for acting services rendered. He didn't know how it was going to happen, but he carried that check with him everywhere and he looked at it often. And years later, he signed a single movie deal for exactly $10 million. That's some serious magician archetype energy. The one who can see past physical reality and doesn't need it to make sense. He can take action and doesn't mind being mocked because he sees what the others can't see and he knows what he knows. He chooses the preposterous future every time and he delivers. If you want to play safe and go with forecasts and projections, you can win the small game. But if you want to play the really, really big game, nothing matters. Literally nothing matters except your willingness to take a leap of faith and risk being preposterous. I'm going to close with another quote from Arthur C. Clarke. It's from his 1962 book entitled Profiles of the Future, and it's become known as Clarke's second law of the future. The only way of finding limits of the possible is by going beyond them into the impossible. Thanks for listening.
Limitless is produced by Neil Haley, with music by Danny Columbi. I'm Tracy Poizner. If you're an innovator, a business leader, or a high performer with deep curiosity about the uncharted reaches of your own potential, visit tracypoizner.com for an accelerated pathway toward unimagined achievements and legacy milestones. I'll look forward to meeting you.